Special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law, Margaret whispered, setting down the crystal tumbler in front of me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. I watched as she slid the drink closer. A pale amber liquid with a barely perceptible cloudy film on the surface. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see her carefully tuck something into her purse. My fingers closed around the glass, but I didn't lift it. Instead, I waited until she turned to fetch appetizers. That's when I did it. Casually switched my drink with her husband Richard's identical one at the adjacent place setting. No one noticed. The Crawford dining room was impeccable as always, gleaming silverware arranged with military precision on the antique mahogany table that had supposedly been in the family for generations. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched our every move from gilded frames. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the scene, but nothing could warm the chill I felt whenever I entered this house. 40 minutes later, as we were finishing dinner, Richard suddenly gripped the edge of the table, his face drained of color. "I don't feel well," he mumbled, before stumbling toward the bathroom. The violent sounds that followed confirmed my suspicions. Margaret's face went pale when she realized what had happened. Our eyes met across the table, and in that moment, we both knew. She had tried to poison me, and I knew it. What she didn't know was that I had evidence of much worse. My name is Nathan Winters, 34 years old, architectural engineer with a specialty in structural restoration. I'd built my reputation restoring historical buildings across New England, preserving their integrity while bringing them up to modern safety codes. It was meticulous work that required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to see problems before they became catastrophic, skills that would serve me well in my personal life too. I'd met my wife Ellie at a charity fundraiser 6 years ago, where she was coordinating the event and I was representing my firm. She stood out immediately, not just for her beauty, but for her competence and quiet confidence. When a speaker cancelled last minute, I watched her solve the crisis with calm efficiency, rearranging the schedule without a hint of panic. We connected. Immediately, both of us practical, career-focused, with similar values and dreams. Ellie Crawford had grown up with privilege, but wore it lightly. She'd earned her MBA and worked her way up in a non-profit foundation rather than relying on family connections. I found her refreshingly unpretentious, brilliant, and kind. Our first date stretched from coffee to dinner to a midnight walk along the harbor. 6 months later, I proposed on that same harbor walk. Her family was another story entirely. The Crawfords were old money from Connecticut, 3 generations of banking executives who measured worth in family names and trust funds. Their estate sprawled over 5 manicured acres, complete with a pool house larger than my first apartment. Richard, my father-in-law, was cordial enough in the beginning, if a bit stiff. He seemed to appreciate my knowledge of historical architecture. At least Margaret, however, made her disappointment clear from our first meeting. I wasn't from the right family, didn't attend the right schools. Worse, I'd built my career from nothing instead of inheriting it, a concept foreign to her understanding of how the world should work. "He seems nice," she told Ellie after our first dinner together, the pause carrying all her disapproval. "But darling, what about Thomas? His family has known ours for generations." Thomas Whitfield was Margaret's preferred choice, son of her college roommate, Harvard Business School, summer home in the Hamptons. The fact that Ellie had broken up with him years before meeting me was irrelevant in Margaret's carefully constructed world. Despite her thinly veiled disapproval, Ellie and I married at a small ceremony in Vermont. The fall foliage provided a natural backdrop that no amount of expensive floral arrangements could match. Richard shook my hand firmly at the reception. Margaret air-kissed my cheek and whispered, "Take care of her investments." Not her heart. Her investments. The first 3 years were relatively peaceful. We bought a brownstone in Boston that needed extensive renovation, a project that combined my professional skills with our shared vision. Ellie continued her work at the foundation, eventually becoming their youngest ever development director. We lived far enough from Connecticut to limit family dinners to major holidays and occasional weekend visits. But then Ellie's grandmother passed away, leaving her a substantial inheritance with Margaret as the trustee until Ellie's 35th birthday, a condition the elderly woman had added at Margaret's suggestion. Suddenly, Margaret found reasons for us to visit more frequently. Mother's just being protective, Ellie explained after one particularly tense dinner where Margaret had grilled me about my business prospects. Grandmother's estate is quite substantial, and she's taking her trustee role seriously. I nodded, but something about Margaret's intensity felt personal rather than professional. The way her eyes followed me around rooms, the probing questions about my company's finances, the casual references to friends whose marriages had fallen apart over money. Dinner at the Crawford estate became a monthly ordeal. Richard would discuss markets and politics, occasionally asking about my restoration projects with what seemed like genuine interest. Margaret would ask probing questions about my business, our finances, when we planned to start a family. Each visit felt like a performance review. I was destined to fail. "Your mother still doesn't like me," I mentioned to Ellie after a particularly tense Easter dinner, where Margaret had seated me next to her twice-divorced friend who spent the meal explaining how she'd upgraded with each marriage. "She's just protective," Ellie said, squeezing my hand. "She'll come around." She didn't. If anything, Margaret's behavior grew more concerning. She began sending Ellie articles about couples divorcing after the wife's career outpaced her husband's. She forwarded emails about prenuptial agreement loopholes. She even arranged accidental meetings with Thomas when we visited. "Just bumped into him at the club," she'd say with artificial surprise as Thomas appeared in his tennis whites, conveniently single again. "Thomas? You remember Ellie and her husband Norman?" "Nathan," I'd correct, extending my hand while Thomas looked at me with the bored condescension only generations of unearned privilege can perfect. I remained polite, focused on my relationship with Ellie rather than her mother's manipulations. Our marriage was solid. We supported each other's careers, made financial decisions together, and were starting to discuss having children. Margaret's disapproval was unfortunate, but ultimately irrelevant. But 6 months ago, something changed. Margaret's hostility became more overt, her comments more pointed. During a Labor Day barbecue, while retrieving beer from the kitchen refrigerator, I overheard her talking to Richard in hushed tones. "He's after her money, obviously," she hissed. "We need to protect Ellie before he gets his hands on grandmother's trust. Once she turns 35 next year and that money transfers." Richard's response was too quiet to hear, but Margaret's wasn't. "Don't be naive, Richard. I've seen how he looks at the house, asking questions about the artwork. He's calculating his share already. Thomas says we should—" They went silent as I deliberately made noise with the refrigerator door. When I turned around, Margaret was smiling as if nothing had happened. "Found everything you need, dear." The endearment sounded like an accusation. I didn't confront her. Instead, I began paying closer attention. In my profession, structural problems are rarely visible on the surface. You have to look for the patterns, the small anomalies that indicate deeper issues. And Margaret was showing cracks in her carefully maintained facade. I noticed how she'd pull Ellie aside for private conversations, after which my wife would seem troubled. How family financial documents would be conspicuously displayed when we visited. How Richard had begun treating me with a new coolness, as if he'd been convinced of something. 2 months ago, I found Ellie reviewing our prenuptial agreement late at night, the blue light of her laptop illuminating her frowning face. Everything Okay? I asked, keeping my voice casual as I set down a cup of tea beside her. She startled, closing the laptop quickly. Just some estate planning, Mom suggested. At midnight, I sat beside her. Ellie, what's going on? Nothing. She smiled unconvincingly. Mom just mentioned that with grandmother's trust transitioning next year, we should review our arrangements. I nodded and didn't press, but the next day I made an appointment with my attorney. Not to contest anything. Ellie's inheritance was hers alone, as it should be, but to understand what might be happening behind the scenes. Charles Harrington had been my lawyer since I started my business, a shrewd older man with connections throughout Boston's legal community. Someone's been making inquiries about the enforceability of your prenup, he confirmed after some research. Nothing official, just preliminary consultations with several firms in Boston. Margaret Crawford. Not directly, Charles said, shuffling papers, but the inquiries came from firms the Crawford family uses regularly. There's more, Nathan. There have been background checks run on you, extensive ones, not standard financial checks, but the kind that look for leverage. I thanked him and asked him to keep me informed. That weekend, I installed security software on my personal devices and created backups of all our financial records. Not because I was planning anything, but because 18 years in structural engineering had taught me to prepare for worst-case scenarios. 3 weeks ago, Margaret called to invite us to dinner. A special occasion, she said, though she wouldn't elaborate. Ellie was traveling for work that weekend, a conference in Chicago she couldn't reschedule. You should still go, Ellie insisted. When I mentioned the invitation, Mom specifically said she wanted you there even if I couldn't make it. That was unusual enough to raise my concerns. In 6 years, Margaret had never once requested my company without Ellie present. I think it's a good sign, Ellie said hopefully. Maybe she's finally warming up to you. I agreed to go, but took precautions. I charged my phone fully. I let my brother know where I'd be, and I installed a small recording device in my jacket pocket, something I'd purchased after overhearing Margaret's conversation months earlier. In my profession, documentation protects you when structures fail. The Crawford estate was unusually quiet when I arrived that Friday evening. No other cars in the circular driveway, though Margaret had mentioned it would be a small gathering. Richard answered the door, seeming surprised to see me. Nathan, he said stiffly, come in. I thought Ellie was joining us. Conference in Chicago, I explained. Margaret insisted I come anyway. He frowned slightly. Did she? Well, it seems we're a small group tonight. The Hendersons cancelled last minute. Inside, Margaret was arranging flowers in the dining room. She looked up, her practiced smile sliding into place. Nathan, you made it. Where's Ellie? Work conference. She sends her regrets. I watched her carefully. You knew that, didn't you? You spoke with her yesterday. A flicker of something crossed her face before she recovered. Of course, it slipped my mind. Well, more wine for us then. The dining room was set for 4, despite Richard's comment about the Hendersons cancelling. Margaret quickly removed the extra settings, her movements precise and controlled. I've prepared Richard's favourite, beef Wellington, she said, as we settled into the living room for pre-dinner drinks. I hope you're hungry. The evening proceeded with strained small talk. Richard asked perfunctory questions about my latest projects. Margaret kept refilling wine glasses while barely touching her own. I noticed her checking her watch repeatedly, as if waiting for something. Dinner itself was elaborate, but tense. Margaret kept steering the conversation toward Ellie, her childhood, her education, her career trajectory before meeting me. The implication was clear. Ellie had been perfect until I entered the picture. Then came the after-dinner drinks, a special reserve bourbon Richard had been saving. Margaret insisted on pouring, disappearing into the kitchen with the glasses. Nathan, Richard said quietly while she was gone, I want you to know that whatever happens, this isn't personal. It's about protecting Ellie. Before I could ask what he meant, Margaret returned, setting the tumbler in front of me with that practiced smile. I noticed the slight discoloration in my drink that wasn't present in the others, the barely perceptible residue at the bottom that hadn't fully dissolved. Years of working with precise measurements and chemical compounds had trained my eye to notice inconsistencies. Something was in my drink that wasn't in the others, and Margaret's unusual insistence that I attend dinner without Ellie suddenly made perfect sense. I didn't immediately confront her. In my profession, you gather evidence before drawing conclusions. So when she turned to get the dessert plates, I casually switched my glass with Richard's. Then I activated the recording device in my pocket. Throughout dessert, I sipped water while Richard drank my bourbon. 40 minutes later, he suddenly gripped the table, his face pale and sweating. "Richard?" Margaret's voice was concerned, but her eyes darted to my untouched bourbon. "Bathroom," he mumbled, staggering away from the table. The sounds that followed were unmistakable, violent retching, groaning. Margaret's face drained of color as she looked between me and the bathroom door. "I should check on him," she said, rising quickly. "What did you put in my drink, Margaret?" I asked quietly, stopping her in her tracks. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her hand trembled slightly. "I think you do." I held her gaze. "The same way I think you know about the consultations with divorce attorneys in Boston, the ones looking into Ellie's inheritance." Her eyes widened fractionally before her composure returned. "You're being ridiculous. Richard is clearly ill, food poisoning, perhaps. Interesting that it affected only him, don't you think? Especially since we all ate the same meal." "Perhaps he's allergic to something," she said, the tremor in her voice, belying her calm exterior. "I should really check on him." "Margaret," I said evenly, "we both know what happened here. What I don't know is what you were planning after I became ill. Was someone else coming over? Thomas, perhaps?" Her hand tightened on the back of her chair. "You should leave." "I'm happy to." I stood up, keeping my voice level. "I should go. Please tell Richard I hope he feels better." "Oh, and Margaret?" "I'll be telling Ellie about tonight." "She won't believe you," Margaret said, her mask finally slipping. "You have no proof." I tapped my jacket pocket lightly. "Actually, I do. The drive back to Boston gave me time to think. Whatever Margaret had put in my drink wasn't likely lethal. She wasn't a murderer, but it was clearly meant to incapacitate me. But why? What was supposed to happen after I became ill? I called my brother from the road, explained the situation, and asked him to meet me at my house. When I arrived home, I transferred the recording from dinner to my computer and made copies. Then I checked our home security system, reviewing footage from when Ellie and I were both away. Nothing seemed amiss. The next morning, I received a text from Margaret. "Richard has a terrible stomach virus. Best you didn't stay. Let's not worry. Ellie with this while she's working." I didn't respond. Instead, I called my attorney again and explained what had happened. "This is serious, Nathan," he said gravely. "We should consider going to the police." "Not yet," I replied. "I need more information first." I spent the next day reviewing the recording, consulting with a friend who worked in pharmaceutical research about possible substances that could cause Richard's symptoms, and planning how to approach Ellie. I needed to be careful. Margaret was her mother after all, and whatever had happened between us, that relationship was important to my wife. 2 days later, Ellie returned from her conference. She seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently and stepping out of rooms to take calls. When I mentioned dinner at her parents', she tensed visibly. "Mom said Dad got food poisoning." "That's terrible." "It wasn't food poisoning," I said quietly. "Your mother put something in my drink. I switched glasses with your father when she wasn't looking." Ellie stared at me, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and anger. That's impossible. Why would she do that?" I took a deep breath. "I think she's been trying to create problems between us. Has she been suggesting that I might be after your inheritance, that maybe our marriage isn't working? Her silence was answer enough. Ellie, I need to show you something. I played the recording from dinner, including the conversation after Richard became ill. Then I showed her the emails from my lawyer about the prenup inquiries. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would she do this? I think she wants to protect your inheritance. She believes I'm a threat to it. Ellie shook her head, tears forming. That's ridiculous. We have a prenup. You've never even asked about grandmother's money. I know, but I don't think this is really about money. I took her hand. I think it's about control. Your mother's never accepted me, and with your 35th birthday approaching, she's going to lose control of the trust. She's getting desperate. Ellie was quiet for a long moment. She's been calling me every day since I've been in Chicago, saying she's worried about you, that you've been making strange financial moves. She even suggested you might be having an affair, and Thomas has been helping her gather this information. I guessed. Ellie nodded slowly. He's in finance now. She said he noticed some irregularities when he was reviewing some public records for her. Public records of what? My business is private, and our personal finances are joint. There are no public records to review. I know, Ellie said softly. I didn't believe her, but she was so insistent, so worried. She said she had documents to show me once I got back. Documents that she needed me out of the way to show you, I concluded. Hence the drug drink. The next day, Ellie called her mother, putting her on speakerphone while I sat silently beside her. How's Dad feeling? She asked. Much better. Just a 24-hour bug, Margaret replied smoothly. Nathan told me what happened, Ellie said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. About the drink. A long pause. I don't know what he's told you, but your father simply got ill. It happens. Mom, Ellie's voice hardened. Nathan recorded the conversation. Another longer silence. Ellie, darling, I think you and I should talk privately. Whatever Nathan thinks happened, did you put something in his drink? I was trying to protect you. Margaret's voice suddenly shifted. He's after your money, Ellie. The timing of your marriage, right after your grandmother changed her will. He's been planning this all along. I squeezed Ellie's hand as she replied, That's not true. And even if you believed it was, what you did was illegal. What was in the drink, Mom? Just something to help him sleep. I needed time to show you some documents, to help you see what he's really doing. Thomas has been looking into... Thomas, Ellie interrupted. What does he have to do with this? Margaret hesitated. He's been helping me gather information. He still cares about you, Ellie. He always has. Ellie ended the call shortly after, sitting in stunned silence before finally turning to me. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I had no idea she would go this far. The following weeks were difficult. Ellie insisted on meeting with her mother in person, with Richard present. I offered to stay away, but she wanted me there. The confrontation was painful. Margaret initially denied everything, then tried to justify her actions as maternal protection. Richard, still unaware of what had actually happened, was horrified when Ellie played the recording. You drugged me? He asked Margaret, his face ashen. To frame Nathan? It wasn't like that, Margaret insisted. It was just a sleeping aid. I needed time with Ellie. To show her fake documents, I said quietly. Documents Thomas helped you prepare. Richard turned to his wife. You've been working with Thomas Whitfield behind my back after I expressly told you to stop interfering in Ellie's marriage? The family dynamics I witnessed that day showed me a side of the Crawfords I hadn't seen before. Richard's quiet authority, Ellie's unwavering strength, and Margaret's fragility beneath her controlling exterior. In the end, Ellie made her position clear. She would maintain a relationship with her parents, but there would be boundaries. Margaret would step down as trustee of the inheritance immediately, with Richard taking over until Ellie's birthday. and Thomas Whitfield would never again be welcome in their home. "I hope someday you can accept that I love Nathan for who he is, not what he has," Ellie told her mother as we left, "and that I'm happy, truly happy with the life we've built together." As we drove home, Ellie reached for my hand. "I keep thinking about what could have happened if you hadn't noticed the drink," she said, "if you hadn't been paying attention. All these months, it's what I do," I reminded her. "I look for structural weaknesses before they cause collapse." "Well, I'm glad you applied those skills to my mother," she said with a small smile, "though I think she may be beyond renovation." "Most structures can be saved with the right approach," I said. "It just takes time. And time was what we decided to give the situation. We reduced our visits to the Crawford estate, but didn't cut them off entirely. Ellie maintained regular calls with her father and occasionally with Margaret, though always on speakerphone with me present. Slowly, warily, we began rebuilding. 6 months later, Ellie's 35th birthday arrived. The trust transferred to her name without incident, and we continued our lives exactly as before, focused on our careers, our home, and eventually the family we hoped to build. Margaret never directly apologized for what she'd done, but on the first anniversary of the incident, as we'd come to call it, she sent me an unexpected email. "Nathan, I still believe my daughter could have done better than an architectural engineer from nowhere important, but I've come to accept that she loves you, and more importantly, that you genuinely love her. Not her money, not her name, her. I suppose that makes you a better man than most in our circle. Take care of her. Margaret." It wasn't much, but in the Crawford family, it was practically a declaration of affection. I showed it to Ellie, who laughed through tears. "That's Mother's version of a peace treaty," she said, "and it was enough. Not perfect, not ideal, but enough of a foundation that we could build upon it, carefully, cautiously, one dinner at a time. In my profession, I've learned that sometimes the most damaged structures can be salvaged, but never without first acknowledging exactly where the weaknesses lie. Margaret had shown us hers, finally, and now perhaps we could begin the real restoration work."